You're visiting the Mom Next Door and our stories of faith. I'm glad you dropped by for a visit. Please stay a while and hear what the Lord has done in the lives of moms just like you and me. Hey friends, welcome to the Mom Next Door Stories of Faith. I'm Pam Fields, and today we are having a virtual coffee date with Brenda Yoder in the quaint town of Shipshewana, Indiana. We know that there are no perfect places this side of heaven, but life runs a little slower there, maybe a little simpler, and that's something that most of us long for amidst our crazy busy lives. Brenda, would you paint us a picture of your life growing up, raising your children, rooting into community, and the things you've learned along the way? I know that's no small order. I kind of just said, tell us everything. But, as much as you want to get into right now at this moment.
Sure. So I grew up in Shipshewana, Indiana, as a town girl. My life was just pretty normal, like everyone else's. I was a cheerleader in high school, married my high school sweetheart, who was a Mennonite dairy farmer. So we both went to Purdue University and came back to our hometown to live here. And so we currently live on a several acres that are in the midst of a family farm. And so my husband is a teacher. He also taught and was the manager of the dairy farm for the first half of our marriage, so for about 20 years. And I was a stay-at-home mom. I was a high school teacher, went back to graduate school at 40, got my degree in clinical mental health counseling, also in school counseling. And so I have worked part-time as a day job as a therapist or school counselor, and then also am a writer and speaker. But our little town in our community comprises of the third largest Amish and Mennonite community in the country. And so life does run a little bit slower here because half of our population drive horse and buggies. They do the old order Amish do not have electricity, but at the same time, they learn to adapt to all the different changes that come their way, including technology. So when people think of the idyllic Amish lifestyle that is completely drawn away from modern culture, that's not really what happens here.
Mm-hmm.
As I share in Uncomplicated, with every new technology, the Amish community around me has to decide what are we going to do with this. I'm not Amish, but I did join my husband's Mennonite faith, and our church and our church community and our community in general still kind of function at and in the world, but apart from the world, cultural and faith-based tenant. So growing up in town and not being part of that faith, and then marrying into that faith, and then also just being a dairy farmer's wife and living a very full and busy life as a farming family. I've learned that problems will always be part of any life, any
Yeah.
lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
But
In
how we
every
deal
community.
in every community,
Yeah.
but how we
Uh-huh.
deal with it, how we problem solve, how we don't jump on the next thing that's coming down the pike is the difference. And that's really one of the reasons that I wrote Uncomplicated, Simple Secrets for a Compelling Life, is because so many people come to our area. It's the number one tourist destination in the Midwest in 2024. And during the pandemic, I really started noticing that people were coming here because we had something that made sense to them. And even in my own experience, during those early pandemic lockdown days when nothing seemed to be making sense, there weren't any solutions to this really big worldwide problem. I saw my Amish neighbors horse and buggy go down the road in front of me while I was sitting on my front porch. And there was something that spoke to me that said, you know what, I've taken this for granted, but you know what? We still have the capacity as humans to come up with tangible solutions to real life problems. And we have complicated so much of life
Mm-hmm.
when generations past have always dealt with really difficult issues And you know what? Technology, our fast-paced culture, our inability to problem solve because we're always going to Google first, such a wide variety of problems we have added to our modern life, not because we're so much better than our past generations, but truly because we have lost the art of really learning how to live a back to basics lifestyle. And it's really not about being Amish. It's not about canning food. It's not about living on a homestead. It's really about using the God-given skills that He's given us as the human species or as human beings created in His image to be able to live life in the way that He has designed us to. So I don't know. That's a maybe a really global answer to really to a really wide open-ended question, but
Yeah.
that's my starting point for today's conversation.
Yeah. I was thinking about the t-shirt that I see so often. It just says, don't overthink it, or
Mm-hmm.
excuse me while I overthink this.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be more of our common way to look at problems. And I was also thinking of the word frenzied. Like we just work
Mm-hmm.
ourselves up. Answer. I got to find the answer. I've got to have the perfect, and we're just going, going, going. And where as if you're slowing down, and I'm about a third of the way through your book Uncomplicated, and I really did feel like it was an invitation and
Mm-hmm.
permission to slow down, and I've
Mm-hmm.
I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I think it's not a slow down to life. Like, I think that's one of the misconceptions is that this book is going to help you have this dreamy life. And it's not. What it really is some practical tools to almost reintroduce, to invite us as humans to say, I don't have to engage in everything that's thrown at me. I can actually pause. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
first few chapters is on prudence, which is this calculated stepping back, pausing and thinking before you do the next thing, before you make a decision. And I think when you asked about what lessons have I learned, being married to a dairy farmer, I have learned the lesson of you don't have time to figure out the perfect answer in a lot of difficult situations. You also don't have to set up a committee to figure out what is the best practice. As a dairy farmer's wife,
Yeah.
cows have to be milked twice a day, every day. And that's really was a foundation of this book because I use this principle in the counseling office often. It doesn't matter if you're sick. It doesn't matter if someone has just died who's close to you. It doesn't matter if you feel like it. It doesn't matter if there's a natural disaster or what the weather is. Cows have to be milked twice a day, every day. When the feed bunk breaks down, I give the example of when one of our neighbors' milking parlors was damaged in a tornado, and they had over 100 cows they needed to milk now. And my husband and his brothers worked together with them to figure out how to haul 100 cows down the road to our farm, how to keep the two herds separate. That was no small feat. But we had to figure out in the moment, we had to take the next best steps. And then you figure out the next best steps for the long term. And I work with kindergarten through fourth graders currently. And these principles are no different than what I use with a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old with really difficult problems because for a child, most of the problems that a lot of my students face are really big people problems that they have no control
Mm-hmm.
over. An abusive home, a parent who drinks too much, anxiety that they can't control because they're worried about an outcome, again, that they have no control over. And it comes back to the basics of really focusing on what you do have control over.
Mm-hmm.
How do you respond to that? And then what are the tools that you do have in your toolbox in order to problem solve and use resourcefulness? Resourcefulness is
Mm-hmm.
also another one of the principles,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
creative problem solving in a difficult situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, really the whole piece, the whole book is about kind of tapping into the God-given resources that He's given us with our brains, with our life experiences, with
Mhm.
our own strengths. And, the more we simplify our choices, the less anxious we become, the more confident we become in what we can do, and really the more restful and the more peaceful we are
Mhm.
about next steps or about how to
Mhm.
approach a difficult situation. The mantra I've kind of been using surrounding this topic is that life is complicated, but how
Mhm.
we respond doesn't have to be.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah,
that
for
really is
sure.
kind of that invitation to what does that look like in this world that really tells us, no, those ways are so old-fashioned. Those don't work anymore. And this is really a suggestion that, hey, let's wait a minute, and look that these simple solutions really do still work.
Yeah, and I think that's why I was thinking slow down, not that I can slow down my life, right? I still
Hmm.
have four children at home. I've got grandchildren down the way. I've got, we're moms, we juggle a lot. We can't just put everything on hold and slow down like, hey, I'm just going to take
Hmm.
a half a day off every day because my life, but we can slow down our minds and process through things, that scripture about taking every thought captive and
Hmm.
not letting it pull us away to this point of anxiety and desperation and
Hmm.
overwhelmedness. um, Being able to harness that and really manage the things in front of me in a
Hmm.
more calm, cool, and collected way.
100%. And I think that is what social media doesn't give us permission to do. Social
Yeah.
media makes us think that we have to always be in an uproar or we always have to be looking to Google. Now we have AI. Oh, if I just go to AI to tell me how to solve this problem. And the thing that in writing Uncomplicated, I really kind of had this vision in my mind. It's almost like a stake in the ground to say, what, as Christians, we really need to fight for humanity. We need to fight for how God created us as human beings, because the opportunities that will come our way will become more complicated. Technology will become more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if we step back and think about life without all of the options, or how to use the options that are given to us in a limited fashion,
Mm-hmm.
how to balance all the opportunities, all of the information with what is kind of a more back to basics, practical, common sense problem solving. That's really what this topic is kind of fighting for. Let's kind of get back to the middle and let's not forget who God created us to be.
Mm-hmm. Way back a couple years ago, I interviewed a guy, Chris Martin, and he had a book called Terms of Service. And it was interesting. It was about like internet usage and social media and all of that. And what was interesting is he found that people more in my age category, 40s and 50s, actually struggled more with some of that input of social media than teenagers. And I was like, how can that be? And here we are in this generation saying, oh, those teenagers, they're just really attached to their social media. Now, I don't know if that's changed over the last few years, but I thought it was a real interesting observation. And in the last couple months, I've been doing this change to my own media use, and I put an app called Screen Zen on my phone, and it limits how much I can go on social media. And I have seen a definite reduction in my busyness, busyness
Mhm.
of my mind, busyness of all the things, which has been a blessing. Do I have a question there? I don't think I have a question there.
Well, I think what you're identifying is that, when I think about when I first entered social media was probably when I was just entering midlife also. And it was fun. It was the social thing to do. It's where we talked about our kids, where we went to for recipes and things like that. And I think with anything, with anything that's good becomes moderation. But
Yeah.
just like everyone else, there became this point of time in about 2016, between 2014 and 2017, according to Jonathan Haidt. He's the author of The Anxious Generation, and he started identifying when social media started negatively impacting, especially teen girls. And so his new
Mm-hmm.
book, The Anxious Generation, has come out. And now he is having this big movement to fight for childhood. We need a childhood. We
Mm-hmm.
need a childhood where kids need to be outside. They need to be
Mm-hmm.
have screens regulated. And so I think with anything, there's an element of balance. And so,
Yeah.
probably what that author was really advocating for is that we as midlifers were probably stuck in a generation where this new technology was great, but then all of a sudden it was overcoming a lot of our lives. And I
Yeah.
think whether you're a teen, whether you're in your 30s, whether it's my mom who's in her late 80s, there has to be an element of balance. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the principles in Uncomplicated is what I call the middle way. It's understanding that we aren't living in the fast lane all the time. We're not living in the slow lane all the time. We're in the middle lane. And again, it kind of goes back to a verse that I use often in the book, which is 1 Corinthians 10:23. Everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. The younger generations, Gen, whatever is below Gen Z even,
Uh-huh.
they will have technology and social media and the internet as part of their DNA. They will have skills that we can learn from, but again, we also need to really work at, and for those who are parenting, it's really important that we still understand the negative detriments of social
Mhm.
media and of technology on the developing brain. So that's a whole nother discussion. But Jonathan
Yeah.
Haidt, author of The Anxious Generation, is the one who just wrote the book on all of that.
Yes, I think I've heard him mentioned with in conjunction with 1,000 hours outside,
Hmm.
and because that's the same type of movement.
Right. Yes.
I think at the heart too is we all have a need to connect, to have community, to be understood, and that camaraderie. And sometimes social media, especially at this middle age of life,
Hmm.
I think it's really hard to sometimes make that connection and vulnerability, um, because one, we know that everything we put on the internet stays there forever.
Hmm.
That's one of it, right? Like, do I want to leave record of this? But we are also holding not only our own journey, but the journey of our children, like their actual faces and
Hmm.
stories about them. And so that's kind of a fragile package to hold, I think.
Hmm.
um, you also wrote a book about launching our kids and sending them out, and this time of life, sending them out is so uncertain. I don't know if that made any sense whatsoever.
Let me tie some of that together. So,
Okay.
what I hear you say is that as midlifers, for those really in the season of raising teenagers, launching your kids, being empty nesters, is that it actually the heart of Fledge is really walking with the mom through that. It's a very vulnerable and transitional time. And I know for myself, I have 4 kids, and so when social media first came on, I was posting a lot of stuff about our kids, right? And you do it in conjunction with camaraderie with your friends who have kids that age, but then your kids aren't also on all of those platforms. My kids didn't know what I said kind of snarky about whatever they had just on social media because they were on their own teen social media that I wasn't on. They were on mom's Facebook.
Right.
But they were also younger kids too. And then all of a sudden they become teenagers and you can't put things out there because you may be experiencing some really difficult things with your kids.
Right.
Then it
Exactly.
feels lonely. And then as you move
Yes.
into the empty nester, as your kids are getting older, I'm a full empty nester now. All of my kids are now out of the home. They all have lives of their own. And my own kids really aren't on social media a lot. And so it's not really my place to start sharing what's going on in their lives because that's their story now, and they don't necessarily want all of that shared. And
Mhm.
I've even had
Even the good stuff. It's
even
not
the
like it's bad
no,
stuff that you're
right,
trying to
even the good
cover for
stuff.
them.
No,
Yeah.
and I've had to even educate my own parent and to understand when there's a big life event that happens, no, grandma doesn't get to post that first. That first belongs to the child, and then if they give me permission, that's mine to share. But what I hear you saying is that common loneliness that a lot of
Mm-hmm.
midlife women experience.
Yes.
So in both books, both in Fledge, Launching Your Kids Without Losing Your Mind, and in Uncomplicated, there are chapters and kind of connection points for what do you do when your in-person relationships are not as in depth as what you would hope to be.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the chapters in Uncomplicated is on interdependence, and it's really about building those relationships of reciprocity. And the same thing in Fledge, there's a chapter on friendship and loneliness. And it's really a journey. So I just want to encourage all moms who are hearing this and saying, that's me, is that I really want to encourage almost have social media be what builds positive things into your life, but to remember that, you can really have maybe some strong relationships through social media with people who are not in-person friends. Um, and perhaps you build a relationship with them through texting or through Marco Polo. I mean, probably my two closest friends currently are prayer partners who are also fellow authors. They live 3 hours away from each other. I mean, we all live in different states, different parts of the Midwest, but we Marco Polo our prayer requests and our updates weekly.
Mm-hmm.
And we text each other, immediate prayer requests, things like that. The other part is kind of that contentment. So contentment is also another chapter in Uncomplicated. And it's
Mm-hmm.
also about, grieving. If you have to grieve a friendship that has changed, that's okay. But it's also about being content and kind of right sizing your life is a term that I use, which is there's a time to change the activities or the friendships, the relationships, not just all friendships, but just relationships in your life because they don't fit your stage of life. And this was something I realized a couple of years ago because I was really grieving different things that were in that full life when my kids were at home and were involved
Mm-hmm.
in sports and things like that. Well, now that they were in college or out of college, I kind of felt lost.
Yeah.
And what I realized is that I was still doing things, not just with friendships and relationships, but even where I was putting my time, my talents, and my treasures were in this other phase of my life that didn't fit it anymore.
Mm.
And I'll give a practical example. Currently, I work part-time as a school counselor, which came about during COVID. That wasn't a long-term plan, but it has evolved to be something I love. My children now all live out of the area. They live anywhere from 1 to 4 to 13 hours away from me. And we have grandchildren now. We have three grandkids. We have two coming in the next 4 months. We have a wedding coming up in the next 4 months and another impending, maybe upcoming wedding in the next year or so. So my priorities have changed.
Yeah.
And so I uncomplicate my life by saying I'm not speaking except for a handful of times during the year now because I also still am writing. I'm not currently writing on a new book, but I do write for Mornings with Jesus with guideposts. And so that is always a big chunk of my year. I also am committed to my job at school. I serve on a board of directors for a national ministry. Those are my priorities and my family. I mean, my family's number one. But
Right.
I don't want to be gone speaking at retreats during the year if my one of my kids calls and says, "Hey, we're coming home this weekend." And I say, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to be there." Why? Because I'm someplace else. So I think in the whole realm of uncomplicating our life when it comes to transitions and changes, there's kind of a values clarification. And it goes across the board of what we do, who are our most important relationships, and what should we be about. And I think as we go through that process, even whether it's yearly, whether it's quarterly, or even when it's a time when you feel like what I long for in my heart and what I'm living aren't matching, that values clarification really helps for you to think about what your heritage is and what your legacy is that you're living out every day, which is also the last chapter of Uncomplicated. And it really is also a big component of Fledge, which is when you're in the process of raising and releasing your kids, be present where you are. Don't hurry it on, don't wish it away, but also stay with that is the largest, most vulnerable transitional stage of life. And it's one that I really have a passion in helping women through because the empty nest is not just a big leap. It really is a process. And having a thriving empty nest is a process. But while you're still raising and releasing kids, so much of your life is changing. And for many people like you, Pam, it happens over a long span of time. And just having encouragement through that process. It's multi-layered and it's not real simple.
For sure. I'm very happy that you wrote that book, Fledge, because I feel like a lot of times we don't have places to go. There's a lot of books for what to do and expect when you're expecting, what to do in the first 5 years, what to. It seems like by the time our kids are launching, there's not a lot of instruction. And I think some of it is that well, you brought up content, so I guess the reverse would be discontent.
Mm-hmm.
Or we have an expectation of what we want our children to be and what we want our lives to be in the next phase. And then we wake up and we have a realization that didn't go exactly how I imagined it to be. It was not what I planned. And there are ways that I think we can. It's like you said, it's like a journey of walking out and releasing and coming to terms with that. And God is doing a lot in our lives and our hearts through that process. Parenting is not just parenting to see who God makes our children to be and develops in
Mm-hmm.
them, but it's who he's developing us to be through that as well. So, anyway, tell me about your podcast that you have, because I think that may be a companion that can walk beside us a little bit through this next season.
Sure. Yeah, I want to I'll pair the two together. My book Fledge, Launching Your Kids Without Losing Your Mind, really is for the mom in the stage you're in, Pam, which is you are either starting to release kids and you still have some at home, or you are releasing them. You're still parenting. You're not an empty nester yet. And I wrote that for the midlife mom who was releasing kids and that you're
Yeah.
still parenting because it's like whiplash. You're needing to, you might have a 30-year-old and a grandchild, and yet you still have a 17-year-old at home. We have four kids, which is nothing compared to your nine, but we have four. They're all 3 years apart. So I always had one at a different stage.
Yeah.
And so Fledge is really to help all women through, I say, from the full house to the empty nest. And even as you
Mhm.
get to the empty nest, it's a process to really feel maybe fully settled there. And so the Midlife Moms podcast was created with my friend Amelia Rhodes. She's also an author and speaker. She's about 9 years younger than I am. So we kind of span conversations for women kind of in your demographics, which is late
Mhm.
30s probably to early to mid 60s, who are in midlife where you're dealing with elderly parents, you are dealing with perimenopause or menopause. You're dealing with the changes that are happening in your family. Your marriages are changing. So it's really just a conversational podcast. I think we just finished season 5 or 6, and we both are working women. So it's not a podcast where we're going to have like weekly ones that go on year round. We just finished season 6, I think it is. So there's a host of conversations sitting there.
Yeah.
But we just have conversation, and they usually come up from what we're experiencing in life. And so the nice thing about the podcast is that, my kids are just a step ahead of where hers are.
Yeah.
And so she currently has one in college and a senior, and then I have one who just graduated from college all the way up to one in my early 30s. And so we just have conversations about real life. And then we do have a community. We have the Midlife Moms Facebook podcasting community group in Facebook too, that we have weekly prayer and just a place to encourage women. It's not, like we don't give a lot of like instruction in there, but it's really just a place to celebrate mom moments. I speak to a lot of MOPS groups, and in a lot of MOPS groups, they have mom moments, where they stand up
Mhm.
and say, "Oh, this happened." And I think that's one of the elements of grief with parents in midlife, or for moms in midlife, is that we don't have places where we can share, "Oh, this really happened, and this is something I really want to celebrate, this small thing." So we have moments in there just on a kind of a weekly cycle, Monday prompts, Wednesday prompts, and then prayer on Friday.
Mhm. You're right. I mean, there's mops and there's a lot of, young moms meet at the park and we get together when our children have play days. But at this other end of the spectrum, there's not a lot of places that you can really connect. And I don't know if you've noticed this, it feels like sometimes we don't share the successes because we don't want to hurt somebody else's feelings, or somebody might say, oh well, you're just bragging about your child that's so successful, or it is so much pain again, that expectation that of how we wanted things to be, and maybe we've got a
Mhm.
prodigal, or tragedy in some regard, and we still need those connections. We still need to be able to carry that, not by ourselves. That's where you
Mhm.
mentioned the loneliness, the isolation, and that ridiculous comparison that we see online, and even sometimes on Sunday mornings at church,
Mhm.
when we just we don't have a place to get down and vulnerable and share what's truly going on.
Yeah, I call that mom grief. I think that's the first chapter in Fledge is called You've Got Mom Grief. And I think as your children get older, that's also another feeling that you go through. And I talk about several different types of mom grief, because it's not always just, oh, I wish my children were younger and at home. A lot of time it's the grief of regret, things we wish we could have
Mm-hmm.
done
Mm-hmm.
differently, grief of disappointment because
Mm-hmm.
our choices that our children are making are not what we had hoped. The grief of missing childhood, that's where I was stuck for a while, is truly missing the joy of childhood. And some of the grief of just even our own expectations, whether it's of marriage or what we thought we'd be doing. I am consistently juggling in a community where everyone knows everyone else. In our community, a majority of children stay around this area. An Amish family is not going to live far apart. And even in our own community, most people come back and live here. It is a great place to raise your kids. Even if they go away to college, they come back
Mm-hmm.
to this area. My children didn't, but I also kind of raised them really open-handed. I didn't raise them to stay close to me. So part of my loneliness and emptiness sometimes too in my current stage of life is there's not someone in my immediate world who I can really talk to about, I'm really sad because I have to drive like I did yesterday. I have to drive 5 hours just to see my grandkids for 3 to 4 hours. That's something that I don't get to just talk about with someone. So we all have our own things that we can look at others and say, boy, if only they knew. Or, we have these different pain points that we don't put out there in social media. But grief and vulnerability is definitely a part of this season of life.
Yeah. Well, Brenda, you have been an encouragement to me and to the ladies here to really look for those places to be able to be in community. Remember that we don't have to do this alone. Our needs and our concerns are probably a little more common than we want to tell ourselves sometimes. I want to be able to connect people with you outside of this podcast. So I want you to tell me your website and then any of the places that you're on social media.
Sure, they can come visit me at brendayoder.com. They can get any of my books from Amazon or their favorite bookstore. They can connect with me on Instagram at Brenda Yoder Speaks, Facebook, Brenda Yoder Speaker. We do have the Midlife Moms podcast and the Midlife Moms Facebook and community. I do have a podcast that's currently on pause, but it has a great wealth of material called the Life Beyond the Picket Fence podcast. They can subscribe to my email list. I do have a monthly or every other month newsletter that comes out depending on how I'm uncomplicating my life and what
Oh,
are my top
yes.
priorities.
Uh-huh.
But that is where they can reach me.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. And so I love to end out the podcast praying for our listeners, praying for the weeks as we move ahead. Would you pray for us?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Father, we just thank you for this time, and I thank you for Pam's ministry. I just pray for each woman who's listening that you would use something that was mentioned here to encourage her, to breathe life into her, and to help her uncomplicate her current season. And Father, we thank you that you do give us all that we need. We thank you for your promise that says that you will supply all of our needs according to your glorious riches in Christ Jesus. So I ask that you would do that for each person who's listening today. We just invite you to speak to each woman and to what was mentioned here that will be something she can apply and to make a practical next step in her life. And we just pray all of this for your honor, for your glory. Amen.
Amen. All right, ladies, we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us. Bye bye. I hope that you've been encouraged or challenged in your faith today, and that something we discussed prompts you to grow deeper in your walk with the Lord. If it has, make sure you tell a friend so they can grow along with you. And if you or a friend would like to be a guest and share about God's faithfulness in your life, please email me at podcast@tendingfields.net. Because when we tell of God's faithfulness, we never run out of stories.
Whatever is true, whatever is noble, think on these things.